How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Beis, Daf 42 of Masechet Nedarim, friends. Well, Daf 42. Well, we talk about Nedarim. We talk about Shemitah. We talk about Adam Oser Davar Shebershusa L'Chshe'enu Bershusa. Adam Oser Davar Bershusa L'Chshe'enu Bershusa. Friends, you excited for this sugya? You should be. Well, you should be if you should be. That's a very politically correct, politically sensitive, or I guess sensitive way of saying things. You should be excited about it if you should be excited about it. That seems like you can't really step on too many people's toes that way. Okay. Don't want to step on anybody's toes. Friends, well, let's get started over here. Membase. All the way at the top, Mishnah. Or, so if Reuven says to Shimon, friend, buddy, pal, dude, guy, Shimon, person, I'm not going to get any benefit from you. Okay? So Reuven says to Shimon, hey, Shimon, I'm not going to get any benefit from you. Lifnei Shvius. So if we're talking about before Shemitah, so it's not Shemitah. Okay? And Yord the Sochsadeh, Ve'enu Ochem and Anotis. Well, if Reuven says he's not going to get any benefit from Shimon, so he can't go onto Shimon's field, he can't, if there are trees that are kind of hanging over the side of the property, he can't chop the fruits arayin from the tree, he can't get any benefit from Shimon. Uvashviyas, what if it's Shemitah? It's Shemitah year, and Reuven says to Shimon, I'm not going to get any benefit from you, and you're the Sochsadeu, okay, so Reuven can't go into Shimon's field because he'd be benefiting from Shimon's property. Aval, Ochelhu, Mina notice. But Reuven would be able to eat the fruits of those trees that are hanging over the side of his property, right? He won't be able to go onto Shimon's property, but he would be able to eat these fruits essentially because during Shemitah, fruits are hefker. They're ownerless. So therefore, when Reuven says that he's not going to get any benefit from Shimon's property, that doesn't include these fruits because these fruits aren't Shimon's property. They're hefker. They're ownerless. Nedarim enu meichu. If Reuven says to Shimon, I'm not going to get any benefit from your foods. So lifnei Shvius, if it's before Shemitah, if it's not Shemitah, Yord the Sochsadeu, Ve'enu Ochem and Aperis. So Reuven could go onto Shimon's property, right? Because Reuven didn't say anything about avoiding benefit from Shimon's property. He just said he's not going to get benefit from Shimon's food. So therefore, he can go onto Shimon's property, sure. Ve'enu Ochem and Aperis, but he can't eat any of the fruits, because that's food. Now, if it's Shemitah, right, so if Reuven says to Shimon during Shemitah, I'm not going to get any benefit from your food, well then Reuven can go on to Shimon's property, because that's not food, and he can even eat the fruits, because the fruits don't belong to Shimon. It's Shemitah, they're hefker. Okay. Very, very interesting Mishnah. Friends, you ready for the Gemara? Let's do it. Rav Ushmuel Da'amri Tavayu. Rav and Shmuel both say. We're going to see machlokas between Rav and Shmuel on the one hand, and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish on the other. So Rav Shmuel Da'amri Tavayu, Nichosai Olecho. So if Shimon says to Reuven, hey Reuven, guy, dude, brother, man, Reuven, guy. So if Shimon says to Reuven, Nichosai Olecho, Reuven, you cannot get any benefit from any of my stuff. So lifnei Shvius, so if it's before Shvius, i.e. it's not Shvi, it's not Shemitah, and you're the Sochsadeu, Ve'enu Ochem and Anotis. So then Reuven cannot go onto Shimon's field, nor can he eat from these fruits of these trees that are hanging over the side of his property that he can eat without having to go onto Shimon's field. Reuven can't do any of those things because it's before Shemitah, right? It's not currently Shemitah. So Shimon says to Reuven, you can't get any benefit from any of my stuff. So Reuven cannot go onto his field and cannot eat any of these fruits. Now listen to this, friends. Here's where it gets interesting. Afal pi shegia shvius. Even though it is now Shemitah, meaning if before Shemitah, Shimon says to Reuven, you can't get any benefit from my stuff. So Reuven can't get any benefit from Shimon's stuff, and that continues even during Shemitah, right? So if he says that in, Elul or something, and now it's Tishrei, now it's Shemitah, Reuven still cannot benefit from Shimon's fruits, even though now it's Shemitah and all of Shimon's fruits are Hefker. Shimon's neder still applies, and Reuven cannot get any benefit from Shimon's fruits even during Shemitah, since the vow was from before then. Now, if Shimon during Shemitah says to Reuven, you can't get any benefit from my stuff, so while Reuven cannot go onto Shimon's property, he would be able to eat from these fruits of the trees that are on the side of the property that he can consume without having to step foot on Shimon's property. So the interesting thing about Rav and Shmuel's opinion is that even though that if Shimon made this neder before Shemitah, so then even once it becomes Shemitah, Reuven still cannot benefit from the fruits, since the vow was from beforehand. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish argue and they say, Nichsai alecho lifnei shvius, that if before Shemitah Shimon says to Reuven, you can't get any benefit from any of my stuff, so then Reuven cannot go onto Shimon's field, nor can he eat from any of these fruits of these trees that overhang the side of the property, because it's not currently Shemitah. But once Shemitah comes and all of Shimon's fruits become ownerless, so while Reuven cannot go into Shimon's property, because Shimon says that he can't get any benefit from his stuff. However, Reuven can eat from these the fruits of these trees that are overhanging the side of the property that he can consume without going onto the property, that he can consume without stepping foot on the property. Reuven would be able to eat those fruits because currently it's Shemitah, and during Shemitah all the fruits are ownerless, are hefker, and that happens mimele, it happens automatically. Now, so let's say that the machlokas between Rav Shmuel on the one hand and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish on the other is to Rav Shmuel Savei Adam Oser Davar Shebeshuso Afilu L'Chsheyetze Beshuso, that Rav and Shmuel hold that a fellow can make something in his property forbidden even when it's no longer in it, and that will sort of remain and be maintained and will sustain, I think is the word that I'm thinking of possibly, and will sustain even when it's no longer in his property. So Shimon had made this neder before Shemitah. So before Shemitah, all of his fruits were his, right? All of Shimon's fruits belonged to him. And at that time, he made this neder that Reuven cannot get any benefit from anything that belongs to him, including, of course, his fruits. And that neder is sustained even throughout Shemitah, when all of Shimon's fruits become ownerless. Nonetheless, the vow is sustained, and therefore, right, so again, Adam Oser Davar Shebeshuso, a fellow can make something that's currently in his possession, Oser, Afilu, and this will be sustained, it will continue, L'Chsheyetze Meshuso, even once it's no longer in his possession, such as here, when Shemitah makes all of his fruits ownerless, but the neder will, I don't know if sustained is the right word, but will, maintain, the neder will persist. How about persist? Persist ain't bad. Persist. The neder will persist. That sounds like a good fit. Persist. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish Savri, whereas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish hold punkt fakir. In Adam Oser Davar Shebeshuso L'Chsheyetze Meshuso, a person cannot persist a vow, once it's no longer in his possession. Meaning, even though at the time that Shimon made the vow, his fruits belong to him, but once Shemitah comes and his fruits become ownerless, well then the vow becomes null and void, is no longer applicable, right? Ein Adam Oser Davar Shebeshuso L'Chsheyetze Meshuso. A person cannot make something that is currently in his possession Osir, and to persist that Isser once it is no longer in his Rishus, in his property. Very nice machlokas. Now, fact the Gemara b'Tizbira mi'ikal aman da'amar ein adam oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze meshuso. Friends, you hear the kasha? The Gemara is suspicious of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish's opinion, that they say ein adam oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze meshuso, that a person cannot persist a vow for something that is no longer in his property. So So the Gemara is suspicious of that possibility, because imkein niflige b'nechosim elu v'kol shekain b'nechosai. Okay, so up until now we've been referring to nechosai. Nechosai is more general, my property. Nechosim elu would be more specific, these properties. So now, if Rab and Shmuel if Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish really held that ein adam oser davar b'shuso l'chsiyetze m'shuso, say a starker chiddush, say a bigger chiddush, say that even when he's more specific, and even when he says these fruits, and not just my property, but this property, even so, once Shemitah comes, the vow becomes null and void. And then certainly in a situation where he's more general, more broad, and he just says nechasai, my property in general, certainly then the vow would be null and void if it's no longer in his property, right? So therefore, if Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish hold in Adam Oser Davar Shebe, or if there is even a concept in general of Ein Adam Oser Davar Shebe Shuso L'Chseyetze B'Shuso, well then this machlokas should be in a bigger chiddush, in the case of where he's more specific, where he says Nechosai Elu, and still the vow becomes null and void because Ein Adam Oser Davar Shebe Shuso L'Chseyetze B'Shuso. And therefore, and then Memele, in this case where it's more general, right, Nechosai, certainly then we would say Ein Adam Oser Davar B'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. So from the fact that we don't do that, it's suspicious. Okay. Visu, and more so, Hadetnan, we have a Mishnah. The Adam Oser Davar Sheb'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. And in this Mishnah that we're about to read, the Gemara wants to argue, it clearly illustrates that Adam Oser Davar Sheb'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. What's the Mishnah? The Tnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Omer Livno. A fellow says to his yingul, says to his son, Konim shataneneli, you can't get any benefit from me, son, guy. Mace, now the father dies, Yurashenu. Well, the son nonetheless inherits his father. B'chayiv uvmoso, but if the father says, you cannot get any benefit from me, whether I'm alive, whether I'm gestorben, whether I'm dead, in mace, lo Yurashenu. Well, in that case, if the father dies, well then, so the Ran says it doesn't mean that he doesn't inherit him. The son still inherits the father, but he won't be able to get any benefit from that inheritance, any benefit from that property. So here we see that as long as he says b'chayv of moso, so the neder that he made in his lifetime persists even after death, when of course it's no longer, this property is no longer in his possession. So we see Adam Oser Davar B'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso, to which the Gemara says Shani Hachad D'Kamei B'Chayiv of Moso. Look, don't bring me a proof from this Mishnah, because over there it was a very specific case where he says B'Chayiv of Moso, that specifically he says that this vow applies even when I die. So in that case, that's why it persists even after death, even when the property is no longer in his possession. But it's not a proof to say that generally speaking, Adam Oser Davar Sheb'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. Mikomakum kasha. Which the Gemara says, but still it's a kasha, because if there was really an opinion of Ein Adam Oser Davar Sheb'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso, then tell me the bigger chiddush. Tell me that in the case of Nechosai Elu, when we're more specific, and still we're saying Ein Adam Oser Davar B'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. So Elu b'Nechosim Elu Kuliyam Lo Plige. Okay, so which the Gemara says, look, when it comes to Nechosim Elu, when it comes to being more specific, okay, everyone agrees, Adam Oser Davar Sheb'Shuso L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. If you're being more specific, if you're giving, which specific properties, which specific possessions, so then, in that case, Adam Oser Davar B'Shuso Afilu L'Chseyetze M'Shuso. In that case, when you're more specific, the neder will apply even when it's no longer in your possession. Ki plige, where there is this machlokus between Rav and Shmuel on the one hand and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish on the other, is binechosai. Is when you're less specific and more general, and you say that you can't get any benefit from my property. Rav Shmuel Savrei, lo shna nechosim elu, lo shna nechosai. Rav and Shmuel say, look, it makes no difference how specific you are. Adam oser, a fellow can be oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish Savrei, whereas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish hold that nechosim elu, when he's specific, adam oser. So it can be oser, right? Afilu l'chsheyetze mershuso. But nechosai, when it's more broad, ein adam oser, you cannot be oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso when it's just nechosai, more general. Now, what we had just said that according to Rav and Shmuel, there's no difference between nechosai, which is more general, or nechosim elu, which is more specific. They will say adam oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso ve'otanan. But how could that be? We learned in the Mishnah, Omer lachavero, if a fellow says, Konam l'soch beis choshani nichnos, Rav Reuven says to Shimon, I'm not going to go into your house. But he doesn't say which house. Sod choshani lokech, or I'm not going to buy your field. Which field? Meis, oshim mecharo la'acher. If Shimon dies, or he sells it to somebody else, mutter, then Reuven can get benefit from it. So we see that as long as it's once it's no longer in Shimon's possession anymore, it's permitted. So that, right, ein adam osadav shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso. Okay. Devais zeh shani nichnos, sode zo shani lokeach. But if it's this specific house or this specific field, well, in that case, meisa shemachor la'acher osur. So if Shimon dies or it gets sold to somebody else, it's still going to be forbidden. So we see that adam osadav shebeshuso, even l'chsheyetze mershuso. So we see here a distinction between if he's being more broad or if he's being more specific. If he's being more broad, we're saying ein adam osadav shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso. And if he's being more specific, then we say adam oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso. So as the Gemara says, Ki Amir Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish b'nichosai, Rav Shmuel b'nechosim elu v'lo plige. Friends, you hear this? Rav and Shmuel on the one hand, and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish on the other, are actually talking about two different cases. Rav and Shmuel are talking about, right, where they say that the neder persists. So that is talking about nechosim elu, and that's why it persists. And according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, who say that the neder does not persist, that is talking about when he says nechosai, which is more general, and that is why ein adam osur davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso, according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, v'lo plige, but they do not argue. Okay, so Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are talking about two different things, but everyone agrees that when it's nechosai, when it's more general, so ein adam osur davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso, and when it's more specific, so then adam oser davar shebeshuso l'chsheyetze mershuso. V'shvi senior l'soch sadeh v'chule. Oh, so we had said in the Mishnah that if Shimon during Shemitah says to Reuven, you can't get any benefit from any of my stuff, so then Reuven cannot go onto his property, but he would be able to consume the fruits because it's Shemitah and it's Hefker. So if on Shemitah, during Shemitah, Shimon says you can't get any benefit from my stuff, Reuven can get benefit from the fruits. Ma'ishna de ochum, I notice the period Hefker in Inun. The Gemara wants to say, well, why is he only allowed to eat from the notice, from these trees at the edges of the field? I mean, he can eat from them because they're Hefker. Aranami Afkara. So isn't the land also Hefker? Meaning that during Shemitah, if the fruits are Hefker, then anybody's allowed to, right, the land is also going to be considered Hefker to the extent that people can go in and grab the fruits, right? If people can't go to get the fruits, then what's the point of the fruits being ownerless if they can't go in and get them? So the Gemara says, I don't understand. How come we're saying that specifically he eats from these trees that are on the edge of the field? If he's allowed to eat the fruits, it's because the fruits are hefker, but then shouldn't the field also be hefker to the extent that Reuben should be able to go in there at least in order to get the fruits that are hefker? So Ula says, look, the Mishnah is specifically referring to the trees that are at the edge of the field that he doesn't need to go into the field in order to consume. So those he should consume from outside the field and not go into the field if he can't, if he can avoid it. Whereas Shimon ben Yochim says, no, even if the field is hefker, but still we're concerned that he might go in there and wait longer than he needs to. In which case, at that point, he'll be getting unnecessary benefit from the field, and therefore only eat from the trees on the outside, that you can consume the fruits without going into the field. Friends, that was Daf Mem Beis of Masechet Nedarim. Interesting Gemara. I think we got into this question of Adam Osu Davar Shebeshuso L'Cheitzim Meshuso. Can a fellow make something also that is currently in his property, and will that vow persist even once it is no longer in his property? We thought we had a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel on the one hand and Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish on the other, but we ended up saying that they actually agree, and it just depends how specific your neder was. If it was very specific, so then Adam Oser Davar Shebeshuso L'Cheitzim Meshuso. If it's not specific, so then Ein Adam Oser Davar Shebeshuso L'Cheitzim Meshuso. And then we saw two opinions about, a Mishnah that specifically said that if on Shemitah Shimon says to Reuven, you can't get benefit from my stuff, so Reuven can get benefit from fruits of trees that are on the outside of the field but not go into Shimon's field. And the question is, why? Ula says, because, he can go into the field, but the Mishnah is specifically referring to trees that are on the outside of the field that you don't need to go into the field, and therefore you shouldn't go into the field, whereas Shimon ben Yochim says that if you go into the field, you might hang out there longer than you need to, in which case you'll be getting unnecessary benefit, and that's why it's a problem. Friends, that was Daf Mem Beis of Masechet Nedarim. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.